So this is the bonus track. I had a conversation with one podcast host, and he's talking to me for half an hour afterwards, and I'm like, "Hey, you just had another show right there." So so this story didn't make the final cut. So this will be the PG-13 story that didn't make your podcast. My first sermon. My first sermon. Um, I'm in a Baptist church. It was very strict. I'm trying to just understand these people. Man, you wear a tie every day, or you have some old lady asking you why you're not wearing a tie at church. And the pastor comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm going to be off in the future. I want you to preach on this chapter." He just went boom, 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 chapter by chapter. And I go, "Yeah, no problem." So I start looking at it. It's going to be my first sermon. This is great. And I look at it, and the chapter is, God gives the right of circumcision to Abraham. Fantastic. My first sermon is on circumcision.
Oh.
So I go to the wife, who's always been a good advisor to me. I said, "Honey, I need your opinion. I'm thinking of opening with a joke. I'm thinking of telling everyone that today's sermon is on circumcision. The message was a little long, so I cut a bit off the end." And she said, "I don't think you should do that." And I realized, if I can't tell dick jokes in church, am I really free to be myself?
For real. That's hilarious.
Yeah. And that's why I say, good podcast host is going to understand that's a good story, and we'll laugh.
That's a good story. I love that. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have with me today Eric Robinson. Eric spent a dozen years in Christian ministry before leaving the pulpit of his Baptist church to join the FBI, where he worked violations such as drug cartels, Chicago gangs, crimes against children, financial crimes, and national security. Eric served 15 years as a SWAT operator and recently wrote a book detailing some of the extraordinary cases he was involved with and how he integrated what he learned from ministry into his work in law enforcement.
Doing well, Tawny. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome, Eric. How are you today? Yeah, thanks for coming on. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah,
It sounds like you've
hopefully
lived a
there's
very
a little bit
interesting
left,
life.
but sure.
Yeah. So go ahead and, wherever you feel like is the right place to start.
It was a hot day in August.
In your journey in life.
We had just landed on the moon, and my mother gave birth to me, having missed her sister's wedding, and she never forgave her for that. And that was 57 years ago. But anyway, I got into ministry. I was always that precocious kid who knew all the answers in Sunday school. My parents did a nice job raising me. And as I went through college, I thought, okay, this is more personal. Maybe I should do something with this. And so got into ministry from there. Followed the usual route of youth pastor, and then got a job as an assistant pastor, and then planted a church, Baptist church in Western New York. That was 1996, I believe. And started a church with a small group of Christians, and I told them, if we're going to be welcoming people in, and if God's going to judge us, have him judge us because we gave too much grace to people. And the church was successful. We did well by all the metrics, numbers, and really reaching people. However, I did not learn how to separate myself from other people's problems. So when they came to me with the usual, "Hey, pastor, I'm struggling with this," I just held on to it. So for 2 years, every single day, I had a stress-related headache. And it came to a point where I told my wife, I need to find a job with less stress. And so I joined the FBI. It was. It was just different. I mean, it was different. I have plenty of stress in the FBI, but I didn't care about the bad things. I was able to get through it. So the day that I got accepted in the FBI, headache stopped. I thought, okay, this is the right decision.
Do you think it was because maybe there wasn't as much of that personal relationship there? Yeah, so the church, you had more personal interactions with these people. You knew them really well, and then they came to you with your problems, and it was just too much.
I mean, there was nothing different than other pastors have. Some of it was like I was just the only guy, so I didn't feel like I can go to other men in the church saying, "Hey, this is hard for me," because I had to be perfect, and I know that was self-imposed, but it was all those things together, and then it culminated with you know, I was making, like $1.30 an hour pretty much, and we were pregnant with our first kid. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's our health insurance and a lot of stuff together.
Mm,
But with the FBI, it felt very natural.
yeah. Okay. So we transition into FBI. I mean, did you have the schooling and
Well,
background for that, or
I
did you have
did
to
have
do
the schooling
stuff
and
in
background,
between?
I think, in this sense. My wife and I had gone to
Okay.
graduate school. I studied Islam. We were preparing to be missionaries to Muslim countries,
Oh.
so I had that experience interacting with Muslims. 9/11 hits while my application is in process. The FBI says we have an
Mm.
Al Qaeda problem. This guy knows Muslims. Let's take a chance. And then when I got to my first assignment in Chicago, they put me on a drug squad. So that's how that worked.
You're like,
Right.
wait, I thought
We
I was
hired
supposed
a
to be doing
mechanic
that.
and then we had him roof our house. That was kind of the concept. I got back into counterterrorism like 15 years later and didn't remember any of my schooling.
Mm, wow. So, I mean, like, what kind of crazy
Yeah.
stories do you like? Drug cartels? I mean, where does
So
one
for me,
start
it
with all
started
of
like I
this?
get in the FBI. I'd never handled a gun. I was trying to gather this concept of
Wow.
this huge organization, all the things they can do, all the positions. 24 years in, I estimate that maybe I understand 75% of it because there's always something, some new
Mhm.
technology, method, person who's an expert that you find out just because you happen to bump into someone. And I was introduced to
Mhm.
this very fully. I was grateful for it. Working drugs for 5 years in Chicago, and I counted time not by calendar months, but by what wiretaps we were on. Because immediately we're tapping phones, and I'm
Wow.
learning, from the senior guys doing this of this is what it's like, this is what it takes. And so every day I'm either in the wire room listening to someone's phone calls, or I was out on the street doing surveillance in support of the phone tap. So right off the bat, I got all the adventure that I thought I was going to get.
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, so was it more, it was
So
more street
what
drug
the
type
FBI
stuff?
does, we are tasked with enterprise investigations. So different than police, we weren't doing just a buy and then getting that guy pulled. We're working with police who'd say, hey, we just busted this guy. He says he's willing to work, and now that guy is going to buy off of that guy. Now we have him. Rather than arrest him, we use the phone call, which is dirty, and now we get on his phone, and now we hear this guy has kilogram weight of cocaine. Now we're hearing, oh, he's getting it from this guy who gets 20 to 40 kilos. And then we're sending that down to the border where they can get up on guys too.
I bet having all that information is just wild. Like the things you saw and heard, and like, we all hear about it in the news or
Yeah.
whatever, but we're
And
not like
it was
in
very
it.
voyeuristic to be just sitting there listening to people's calls and then doing search warrants where you have access
Mm,
to every corner of their house, electronics, and so you find out a lot about people, and it's all sexual. It's never not. One of the phone taps we were on,
mm.
we were listening, and the wife calls the husband, who's a major dealer, and she says, "Honey, our son found that videotape we made. Why was it in the VCR? That one, that's only for us." And so I'm listening to, this guy sells a lot of cocaine, and yet he also
Oh
has
my
problems with the
God.
wife now because he was watching their sex tape alone.
It's
Criminals are
wild.
people
I
too.
mean,
They have wives and kids and
well,
issues,
sure.
and
Yeah.
you learn that.
Yeah. I mean, did you learn a lot about humanity doing that job? I mean, because you're more involved in parts of people's lives than that
Yeah,
they think
there's
no
a
one's
lot to
listening, no one's
that.
paying attention.
I mean, it's almost like you're, behind them or hearing their thoughts. There's much going on. And there's things you learn about of just what people are willing to do, circumstances they get put in. So you start understanding the criminals a bit, not excusing it, but
Hmm.
saying, okay, this is how it goes. Here's a guy that
Sure.
we may have listened to his phone, we may have sat on him for surveillance, and now we have the post-arrest interview, and now we're really learning more about the person. And I remember one guy we arrested was a major dope dealer. He was a nice guy. I'm talking to my buddy who's a case agent. I go, is it me, or like, would you not mind having him as a neighbor? And he said, super polite. So he just was trying to make money. That's it.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that people's circumstances to fall into that stuff are not just a normal everyday life. They're not living normal everyday lives. They fall into that
They
because of
can, but
poor
also,
circumstances,
if
probably.
you're selling 20 kilos of cocaine a month in Chicago, you didn't stumble into it. You were looking for it as well. And the
Well,
the last informant I had when I was in
yeah.
Chicago was a former Border Patrol agent. So, he had been waving things through, and you think, oh, okay, he saw an opportunity. The guy had been working like 18 months when he got caught. So, he went into it, that guy, just looking to make money from the beginning.
And I suppose the drug trade is good
It,
money
it
from what
can
I
be.
hear.
And
So,
the number of times we get into somebody's house and go, dude, like, I think you're just lazy. Like, you just want to make $10,000, for one. Yeah. If you got a job, you could
quick.
afford this house with a job. You don't have to sell dope too. So,
Were a lot of them, I'm curious, were a lot
no,
of on
no,
using the
like,
drugs or just
so I
selling
worked
them?
the cartels for 5 years, and these were guys who they would strictly just bring in heavy weight. Then they had buyers who would then break it down from there. And then for about a year and a half, I worked gangs in Chicago, and they were the buyers from the guys I had worked previous. Like, they were the ones who would buy a half a brick at a time and then break it up, bag it up, and send it to their guys from there. So I kind of
Mm.
worked it reverse, where I was going after the heavyweights and then to the more violent ones who were selling smaller amounts. Oh yeah.
They were more
Oh yeah.
violent
We had to be
than the
careful of.
heavyweights?
They had shorties on the corner.
Jeez.
They would shoot the heavyweight, the larger narco dealers were ones who they just want to keep quiet and have nothing to do with anybody. They had their buyers and that's it. They rarely lived like a big Scarface type life. They just sold and went about business.
Interesting. So a lot of that is
Yeah, well,
Hollywood making
that's
it look
boring.
worse
Who's
than
going to watch a movie about that? About a guy who just goes to the taqueria and then sells dope and then goes back and watches TV.
Huh. That's interesting. So, I mean, what is your, since you've, I'm just sticking with the Chicago stuff for now, since that's where we're at, but like, I don't know. I like Chicago as a city, but, obviously every city has its bad parts. So, do you kind of feel like Chicago, now that you know the insides of the bad stuff,
So my
like,
wife and I had done
what is that like
some
to you?
schooling outside of Chicago, and so it was high on my list. Like, hey, let me stay in the Midwest, hours from home, and we made do. And yet when I left, I say it's like taking off a wet sock. So when your shoes get wet, you're like, yeah,
Mm,
my feet are wet, and then you take your wet socks off, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so much better. So the big city gave me opportunities to do a lot of remarkable things, and then moving to Toledo, Ohio, where
yeah.
250,000 people. I live on 5 acres now. Like, it's quiet. And you could affect
Mm,
your community positively. We did one gang roundup in Chicago where
mm.
I think it was like 56 guys we arrested, and that corner was not any
Whoa.
safer. So, like, you can do this, and what does it matter?
That's really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So somebody else
There's
just kind of took up the
other
reins?
gangs
Is
move
that,
in, or
huh?
other individuals from that gang move up, and they just fill the slots, and it goes on.
That's kind of frustrating for you. Like
Yeah,
you're doing all this good getting these guys off the
yeah.
street
And
and
with
then
that,
it
and with
just
the
happens
drug war,
anyways.
I always tried to rationalize it that there has to be some type of punishment or penalty so that the criminals didn't just proceed with impunity. Like, we at least slowed them down because they had to be
Mm,
careful. They couldn't just sell to anybody anytime because maybe it's an undercover. They couldn't be out in the open. So, we were a lead weight on their leg to slow down the process.
well, I
That's about
suppose
it
that's better
too.
than nothing. Yeah. So you did the top of the pyramid
So
guys, then the
after about
gangs, and then
six
where'd you go
years
from there?
of late nights and lots of hours and 6 days a week, a friend of mine was moving and said, "Hey, do you think you'd want to work public corruption and civil rights?" And I thought, yeah, maybe slow it down a little bit. So moved on to, so drugs, gangs, public corruption, three things Chicago's known for. So I got to do those and ended up
Mm,
being a part of two significant cases in Chicago. One that brought a modicum of justice for the city because we charged a Chicago police commander who was retired. He and his crew had tortured people for years. His name is John Burge, and we Elliot Ness
mm.
style got him years later on perjury and obstruction of justice. He had carried this out in the 70s and 80s. Chicago police did nothing, the FBI did nothing, and finally we were able to get him for lying under oath.
Wow. I I am frequently amazed at, I don't know, the justice system and all of the like boxes that need to be ticked for, getting these people officially. I've watched documentaries and stuff, and I'm always like, how is that not enough? How is that enough? So, like I recently watched that
Mhm.
Trust Me documentary on Netflix, the
I
Mormon
haven't,
guy
but
and
no, I will.
whatever. Have you seen that one yet? No. Well, the guy is like clearly molesting children, like they marrying children, all the things, and they had all this evidence. They raided his house and
Is
everything, and
that
then they were like, "But we
is that
still
Warren
don't have
Jeffs?
enough." And I was like,
Oh, okay.
"What?" No, it was this other
Very
guy who
good.
thought he was the next Warren Jeffs in a teeny tiny town on the border of Arizona and Utah, and it's a wild story. But I'm watching this documentary, like, how do they not have enough? So how was that for you
Oh,
working in it, knowing you had to get certain things on these people, but knowing
that was a
they're all
constant.
obviously
Like I
criminals?
just had to come to peace with it. That's constantly what we were confronted with. So
Yeah.
two factors there. One is like I'll say, hey, here's 12 guys I can prove committed a crime, and the prosecutor will go like, yeah, we're going to charge 9 of them. And so now 3 people that I know have committed a crime are just going to walk away. No justice. They're just moving on. And then other times, what you're describing is you and I can talk about people that I investigated, and I can tell you things, and you can say, he's guilty. And I say, yes, he is, but not in court or not provable because there's rules for
Why?
court. So, like, I say, hey, this guy did this, and you're like, that's terrible. And like,
Yeah.
yeah. And yet the prosecutors, and another thing you had to come to terms with, and I accepted this one, is that they have a limited amount of time. We have limited prosecutors federally, they have limited time, and they can't afford to go to
Mm.
trial. They'll risk it if they need to, but like if there's these guys and then this one like looks like he's going to fight it, they're not going to go because that's going to take up a month of their time. And then I would find like I'm trying to get a search warrant signed, prosecutor's not available because he's in trial, and I go, okay, yeah, I see it now. Yeah,
So it's a system issue more than
the
anything.
yeah, yeah, money
System and
for more
money, I suppose.
prosecutors.
Right. Wow. Yeah, it's amazing to me because, again, I think it all works out like the movies, and eventually you get justice on these people, but that's not always how it. In fact, I think
Look at
it
that.
works
Look
out
at
way
that.
less
10:15 in the morning for
than
you.
it should,
Already got you
probably.
depressed. Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not depressed. I'm just learning. But, oh man. So, I mean, that's crazy. So it took you,
Yeah.
you had to get him on
Yeah.
lying under oath,
He and
but he was a
his
criminal.
the officers underneath him they tortured it's 100 some victims that came forward, almost exclusively black men, and they tortured confessions out of them. And so our job, my
Man.
buddy Jake and I, along with the rest of the team, we were going around interviewing these victims, and these victims were almost always actually criminals. So they had served their time, but you can't torture them.
Mm.
Like, yep, this guy is a
Yeah.
rapist, but you can't torture them as the police. And so John Burge was
Yeah.
sued federally, civilly, and during that suit, he said, I know nothing about torture. And so if we could prove that he did know because he carried it out, we could get him on perjury and obstruction of justice. And just under the line, we did. And for that, that case won the Attorney General's award.
Oh, wow. Nice. Man. So you said you worked
Yes.
on crimes against children.
Yes,
Was that the hardest thing you
in
worked
a
on?
couple of ways. One for the obvious, and
Mm.
one because it was frustrating. Because the victims there were
Mm.
hard to deal with. So in the Toledo office out of the Cleveland
Mm.
division, our mandate was mainly to try to get pimps who were trafficking teenage girls, and they weren't good witnesses,
Mm.
and they were hard to corral. And I got spit on and slapped and sworn
Mm.
at because I'm trying to separate this 15-year-old
Oh,
girl
wow.
from this 27-year-old man who is the love of her life. So that part was difficult too.
Oh, man.
So I would just try to connect with them. And I remember working with my partner Laura, who's did a great job. She was so patient with this, and just seeing her aghast when we were driving one gal, 15-year-old, around the neighborhood so she could point out places where she had prostituted. And she goes, I could really use a cigarette. And I go, I got cigars in the car. And so I was smoking cigars with a 15-year-old girl in a parking lot. And my partner's looking at me like, what are you doing? I'm like, she has sex with men. It's okay
Mm.
for me to give her a cigar. But, trying to build rapport any way that you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
so you can get,
So that you can get them to
so
talk.
ultimately you can get these men who are taking advantage of them out of the system. The difference between you and me and them is you meet a teenage girl who's a runaway who's prostituting, and we go, let me help you. Whereas they go, fantastic,
Right.
this is my opportunity to make money, and they latch on.
Man, that's really sad. So that does that happen a lot more than I
Probably.
think it does?
And just to clarify
Yeah.
too, the idea of trafficking, most people think somebody's taking Liam Neeson's daughter and putting her on a yacht, but it's what we had seen. It's almost exclusively a girl who runs away, comes from a terrible home. There's never been an adult in her life that had any value, and now she needs to make money, and so she's prostituting already on her own. And then along comes a guy who is in this business or wants to build his stable, and he says, look, I can make you more money, I can protect you, I can set up your posts on the website. And he's not many times not forcing her to do anything she hadn't started doing in the first place. And that's why we would have so many pimps go to
Interesting.
trial, because they're like, I didn't do anything, like she was doing this already. And there's other cases too, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But and then it sounds like those girls were
Yeah.
manipulated quite a bit by those guys
I,
then. They
15-year
yeah.
old girl. I mean, she may be more
Yeah.
streetwise than you or I were at that age, but still not wise. She,
And you and I are looking at
yeah,
it going like, this
yeah.
guy's a piece of shit. And then, let me get you away from
And
that.
what
And then
we
she's like, no,
saw
no.
so often was, that initial, like, they're screaming at me and I had snotty tissues in my Tahoe, and because this is so terrible. It took some time, almost like a deprogramming, that they have to get out of that. Then they look back and go, okay, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, he was a piece of shit.
The repair that comes after that
Well,
trauma,
that
that's
was
probably
one.
brutal for
We could
them.
find the girls, we could arrest the pimps, but then I remember the first time we recovered a teenage girl, and I was like, well, hell, what do we do now? Like, you're gonna are you gonna
Yeah.
send her back to the foster home she
She
just
has
ran
nowhere to
away
go
from?
now.
Okay, she's gonna run away. We don't want to
Mhm.
arrest them, but sometimes we did, because that's the only way to hold them until we figured things out. And we worked best
Mhm.
when we had some coordination with some NGOs, some non-governmental organizations who's like, hey, this is my charity, this is my mission, this is my halfway house. And then getting tips from guardian ad
Okay.
litems who represented them as attorneys in court, or juvenile detention center guards saying, hey, I noticed when she came in, she had a phone that she shouldn't have. Like, it's way too expensive. Or there's a 27-year-old man who dropped her off and seemed to be, watching her as she went in, or whatever it might be, to pick her up. And that working together is when we worked best.
Man, yeah, I suppose then you're like, okay, we saved
Yeah,
this girl.
yeah,
Now you're on your own. Man, and they've got to, like you said, reprogram themselves to not go back. Did any of them go
yeah,
back into it again with
yeah. A
some
lot
other
of
pimp?
times I had
Yeah.
we were going after one gal, and we had just missed her. We thought she was at this notorious motel, and so we set up a sting because there was another woman, 22 maybe or something, who was posting for her. So we set up a sting to get her so that she could help us find the girl. And I remember, as we got her, yeah, we could have charged, like, we literally could have charged her with human trafficking because she was supporting and promoting this girl's prostitution. But the whole point was, look, let's just find the girl. And so, I take her out of handcuffs and I say, hey, man, you want a sandwich? Let me take you to Subway. And we sat down, on my bumper, and we're talking. And she says, my dad has abused me since I was 2 years old. Do you think that's why I do what I do? I'm like, yeah, I think so. And now we're just turning her back because she's not sleeping on my couch. Like, if I give her $20, like, what's that going to do? And
Yeah.
just have to get past that and move on to the next goal. So now it's 10, now it's
Gosh, that's got to
10:30
be
your
so
time.
hard.
And now I've definitely depressed you.
We live in a sad world. There's a lot of scary things out there. And I think it's easy when a lot of people live sheltered from that. So, like I said, we see it in the news, you hear about it, things like this are happening. But like, if it's not happening to somebody close to
Yeah.
you, it's easy to
You're
turn your
not sitting
blinders
down
on.
having a
And
6-inch Subway,
Not good.
Italian with oil or whatever that we had that day. But, it was that, and it was the regular interaction with the teenagers too, that like there were some that we knew they had prostituted before or they were at risk. And so my partner Laura and I would go talk to them. And I recall one time talking to this gal, and we're at her grandmother's apartment, and it's tiny. And so there's four of us sitting knee to knee, and Granny's right there. And the girl says she can't hear a thing. And just surreal that while we're sitting here and she's telling us all about having sex with strange men, and Granny's just sitting here like this, can't understand a word. And then when we left, Laura just let out a howl because the whole time she was wearing a T-shirt that said "Mountain Dew Me" with the logo, and
Oh
that's a life
gosh.
I never interacted with as a sheltered young Christian man.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet a lot of this was pretty eye-opening for you then since you grew up, in
Yeah.
a sheltered religious household. I
Between
mean,
that and then later, working with informants, I was tasked to recruit high value informants, men and women who had good placement and access and reliability. And now I'm working with people who either grew up in a foreign country with the president or with generals and still had connections, or had close ties to sheikhs, from their homeland, and could make these. And now I'm being opened up to a different group of people in a different way, that now I'm going back and I'm studying their country so I can show respect to them and understand the process, and doing homework so I can say, like, I don't even know who you should reach out to, so let me see who's valuable to the United States government. And so that was eye opening too.
yeah. So you went from so we did cartels, gangs, crimes against
So in
children. Where
2010, I
did you go
finally
after that?
got my transfer to Toledo, Ohio, where I'd grown up, and started out in a resident agency, which is a satellite office. Toledo's about 15 agents and a number of task force officers, men and women from police departments or other federal agencies that are fully dedicated. I worked organized crime for a short time, and then crimes against children. From there, I worked financial crimes, and then finally finished up with human intelligence and national security.
So the financial crimes, is that
It's
like
embezzling and things like
embezzling
that.
and things like
And
that?
and that was, for me, that was the most fascinating work. I love when I was in the academy.
Really?
Our white collar crime instructor, and it was a very short course, was so dull. And so I remember thinking, I don't want to do that. And so when I got assigned to it, I thought, oh, this is terrible. But it was like doing a crossword puzzle. Working drugs, I sell you
Mm.
drugs. I am a drug dealer. Boom, done. I just have to show that. Financial crimes,
Mhm.
money goes missing. Are you just not handling finances well? What's your intent? Following money and understanding movements. And that's where I got to see people who were like me, but doing shady things. So I enjoyed that most of any. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
How long did you do that
Well,
one for then?
at least 4 years, because I had I had one case that lasted 4 years.
Yeah.
So worked that among others too.
Oh, wow.
I can tell you
Yeah.
about it. We
Can you
had a
tell us about
Toledo
that?
area businessman named Mark, who, you're not old enough to remember this, but you can ask your parents. Long ago, we used to get phone calls asking how much we paid for long distance and if we'd like to bundle our minutes for 12 cents instead of 15 cents. Well,
Yeah.
Mark and a partner worked with MCI WorldCom, and back in the mid 90s, they were making $1 million a year doing this. So they're doing great. Moved on,
Mm.
started an ISP, and like, boom, that was right when internet was taking off. Everything crashed, and he moved on to other businesses that had real products. But as investors were solicited to help build
Hmm.
out the product, he just helped himself. And so he was crashing one business after another. And people invested because they look at him and like, this guy's got Lamborghinis, this guy's got a yacht, this guy's got, he had a trophy wife who was the Heisman of trophy wives, all this stuff. And
Yeah.
all of that he had was your money. Like, they thought, oh, he's successful. Like, no, he was just spending people's
Mm.
money. So I got onto him on the tail end of him crashing his last business, which was a two-factor authenticator, which could have been great. He had
Hmm.
previously owned the rights to a search feature that later became Bing, but because he just helped himself to the money,
Wow.
he missed out on that opportunity. So he'd crashed the last company, and at this point, all the creditors were showing up. He was about to lose his house. We execute a search warrant while he was in Hong Kong, involved in his next scam. And his next scam was trading in counterfeit foreign bonds. So he went from stealing money to just straight up con artist. Nothing legitimate about it at all.
Wow.
Just straight up counterfeit fake stuff. And as we showed up for the search warrant, I was trying to be polite to the wife, and she's like, "Come on in. You don't need to, give me any speech. What do you want to know?" And just unloaded. She had lived a good life with him, and now he had no money. She was done.
So
Yeah,
as soon as he
I
ran
think
out of
she
money,
held on a
turned
bit
him
at the end, being pissed off, like, well, at least there's money. And then there was no at least anymore.
Yeah.
So he was involved in this crazy world that I got to find out about. And I had to go to school. Like, I'm talking to guys from the SEC to learn, like, how does this all work? I'm talking to guys from Fannie Mae so they can explain the bonds that he's representing. And then I'm also talking to some of the other brokers in this crazy world, and they're all silly. And one woman I talked to, I said, do you believe this stuff is true? Like, these bonds that you're presenting that clearly look fake? And she says, absolutely. She said, in fact, I had a client that owned a quad. And I said, what's a quad? And she said, oh, that's a bond that's worth $1 quadrillion. And I just let her go ahead and say that. I'm like, I don't know if there's $1 quadrillion in the world. Like, maybe a few so he owns half of the money in the world.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. So Mark was doing these crazy things. He claimed to have a connection with billionaires from the Knights of Malta. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Knights of Malta. So the Knights of Malta is a Catholic charity. So I don't know if he thought it was like Knights Templar, that owned the treasures from Oak Island or something, or if he thought like there is some like massive papal coin involved from the Vatican. So, I mean, this was nuts. And we finally got him. My partner from the IRS and we hear these stories all the time about, oh, he's finally coming to money. So we hear he's finally coming to money again. One of these bonds worked. And I was like, no, it didn't. And then I get reports of him chartering private jets and going on these luxury outings. I'm like, oh my gosh. So he had represented that he owned or had access to broker a Fannie Mae mortgage bundling. And I understand generally what that was, but I'm talking to the experts so they can explain it to me. This REMIC bond. And he was saying, I'll sell it to you for $15 million now. It's going to mature to $150 million. And I think, okay. And what was crazy about it, because he didn't know, is that this bond matured to zero. It was a real bond. It had, let's say, 300 mortgages tied to it. And it was purchased by companies to offset income. So they were buying debt to offset income. Your company did so well this year, you're going to buy this so that you're not taxed as much. Because when you pay off your house successfully, now that debt is taken out because it's no longer liability. And so then I pay my house off from the bundle, and more people who pay off their houses, it shrink. And yet he represented it opposite. Right. I think he didn't know. But the crazy thing is he convinced some buyers, and he got half of the $1 million that he was supposed to get for brokering the deal. So he gets $500,000. He and his partner. And they blow through $500,000 in 45 days, month and a half, and they bought nothing. It was just restaurants and luggage and gambling. Like, are you familiar with the movie Brewster's Millions?
Wow.
With Richard Pryor? Again, ask your parents. No. It's a little older. Yeah, it's a story, and I forget the exact story, but this guy inherits $300 million or something like that, but he has to spend $3 million in a month. It's something like that, where Mark was living this life as if he had to get rid of that money and just burn through it. He had no house at the time, no car, but somehow he got rid of all that money in a hurry.
Was it because he knew
because
he was gonna get caught,
he thought
or
more money's coming. That one worked.
So, like, the psychology behind this guy, did he actually convince himself that all of this was legit?
Legitimately a sociopath. And not just like, that guy's a sociopath. He was a sociopath. I had one of the victims from his previous companies was a somewhat elderly, middle-aged woman who had a disabled son. Her husband had died, she took his life insurance and she invested it with one of Mark's companies so that she could get a nest egg to take care of her disabled son. And as she came to him and said,
Mm.
I needed that money, he's like, nah, don't worry about it. The next one's going to go through and I'll make you whole. And it had no effect. He didn't care.
Mm.
So I don't
Man.
know if that was him believing he's so good that he'll just make deals happen out of the air. I don't know.
Oh, so that was the
Yeah,
main part
yeah.
of your financial
Mark lived
crimes
in a
chapter?
country club estate, and when I arrested him, I was walking him out to a vehicle, and the car had stopped on the quiet street there. And I go, "Hey, go ahead and move along, just a police operation." And the guy rolled down the window. And he goes, "Hey, is that Mark Whitmire?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Can I take a picture?" Because everybody hated him. I said, "Yeah, yeah, here you go."
Yeah, man. What was it like to work on a case like that for 4 years or whatever case that
Yeah,
took a
it
while
was
to
very
finally get the
frustrating
person?
because I had one attorney, one prosecutor at first, and he wasn't invested. I had the next one on, he was great, and then he had stomach cancer, and so like wasn't available for things, and I couldn't blame him. And then I finally get another one, but I had to drive 2 hours to meet with him, and he was go getter, and we finally closed it out with him. He retires, and we finish up the case with somebody else who was great, but it took so long that I would have victims calling me going, "This isn't going to happen, is it?" And I say, "No, it will, and I understand it will happen." And they're like, "It's not gonna. He's never gonna see justice." Like, he will, and he did. Oh, actually, he didn't. He got a 5.5. He got a 5.5 year sentence, which was way
Shoot.
like that was the plea deal. That was prosecutors wimping out. He got a 5.5 year sentence on a plea deal, and I think he served like 9 months, and then got released in 2020 because of COVID.
All of those poor people that were victims
And
of
then
him, like that's
and then he
not
got out and tried
justice.
selling fake
And they'll
bonds
never
again
get their money
immediately.
back. Well, that's like
Yeah, yeah.
that
He
fire festival guy. He did that whole fire festival. I think he went to jail for a little bit and then got out and was doing the
Yeah,
same freaking thing and
sociopath.
filming it all.
I'm so good, I'll make it work somehow.
People are so fascinating to me.
This guy had a group of Confederates with him that they weren't like a team, but like he was dealing with this guy, dealing with that guy, and it was just these misfit criminals. One of them was a pastor out of Corona, California, who, while we were working up charges, a member of his church brought their 12-year-old son to him, says, "Hey, he assaulted his sister," and the pastor and two other grown men then tortured him, which culminated him in them
Oh my gosh.
taking him out to the desert and having him dig his grave. And he got 2 years for that,
Oh
which I
my
think was
gosh.
light. He got more for that than he did on us. But this was a guy who had a company where he dealt in these fake bonds, and he named it the Ananias World Fund. And that's where he made a mistake, because pastor on pastor, I know the most famous Ananias in the Bible. And in Acts chapter 5, Ananias and his wife Sapphira are told to bring into the church like the money from the selling of their land. And they do, and they say, "Hey, is this all of it?" And they go, "Yeah, of course it's all of it." And God strikes them down for lying about money. And this pastor named his fund after that guy who lied about money. So, okay.
Smart.
Hey, buddy, I get
Wow.
your little Easter egg here.
Man, yeah. I mean, knowing what you know about financial crimes, like how much of that is going on too on the internet nowadays?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I mean, people sending money for subscriptions and programs and I mean, I think that's
Yeah,
probably
so
more prevalent than ever, probably.
I'm telling these big stories, but any agent could take hours and just talk to you about complaint calls that they've gotten, or walk-ins who say, "Hey, I had one professor come in and he's like, I think my girlfriend's been kidnapped." And his girlfriend is someone he's never met, but they talk on the internet, and he's given her a lot of money. And now she needs more money because this general who's from Somalia but lives in the United States. And I go, "Hey, man, she's not real." And he goes, he's like, "I know you would say that." The guy
Yeah.
was so calm and logical. He goes, I know you'd say that, but I'm in love. And, there's 1,000 of those people who come in. You know, people my age coming in and say, hey, can you talk to my dad? Can
Wow.
you tell him this isn't real? That type of a thing.
Yeah, my in-laws are in their 70s, and we had a situation a couple years ago where they got a phone call that my husband was
Mm,
in jail for a DUI. And I was at work, and they called me, and they're like, "We have bad news. He was in an accident." And I was like, "What?" And we all lived this reality for, I'm going to say, 45 minutes to an hour,
mm-hmm,
which seemed like forever at the moment. And I mean, there were all these things happening, but these people told them to go bring them money, right? To get him out or whatever. And they claimed they had talked to him on the phone, but
mm,
because of the
mm-hmm.
accident, that's why
Yeah.
he didn't sound like himself. His nose was smashed, like whatever.
And he developed an Indian
And
accent as well
so I even
somehow.
pulled in,
Yeah.
right, probably. I never heard any of these conversations. So I'm like, I leave work to come because I'm like, all right, I need to figure this out. My sister was there, and
Mm,
her father-in-law is a judge, and she's like, well, let me call Clay and see if he can, like, if he can find any information for you or whatever. And so I get other people involved, and I'm like trying to figure this out. I'm on my way home, and my mother-in-law
mm.
calls me, and she goes, it was a scam. And not in that entire time,
I wasn't
none
going
of
to
us
ask.
thought to call my husband.
Yeah.
No, none of us thought about it because they thought they had talked to him. So he's just working and coming home, and he was going
Yeah.
to go play golf that day and living this, like, normal life while the rest of us are being traumatized. But, they're older. They don't understand that this stuff happens. And, like, I just don't even
Yeah.
answer my phone anymore if I don't know the phone number, period. So, but they're like, oh my gosh. And we all live this reality. And they got really close to bringing money to a random spot. It was like a grocery store or something random they were
Yeah.
supposed to
So that's
do before
crazy.
they
And,
were
and
like, this doesn't seem
so the
right.
people that they would have met if they did were likely enlisted to be just receivers. So they would have replied to some ad that says, "Hey, do you want to earn money?" And so they would have been told, "You're going to get people bringing you money. It's for things we sell, but we're overseas. If you get it, we're going to let you keep 25% and then you send it to us." And so they are, probably down and out or foolish themselves and probably not really involved, or maybe they are, but like this is all done overseas. And then they just contact somebody through this advertisement to get them working on it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah,
terrible.
yeah, yeah.
And I
They
think they
they
do prey
they
on
look for
older
folks.
people
So now
too.
here's me. So I got a little white in the beard, and now I only use social media in the past. I had fake names and a fake face so that I could lurk on bad guys to see family connections, or if they're, posting pictures of them with a
Sure.
gun or something. And so I retire. My wife says, "Hey, you got to get actual social media." And so now I'm doing that, and I get people saying, "Hey, I want to be your Facebook friend. I want to follow you on Instagram." And I've got, I think, 3 or 4 right now that I'm watching that are clearly going to be scammers, but I'm having fun to see. Let's see where this goes. Yeah, I can't give
This
it
is
up.
like your
And
retired
it's
hobby.
crazy because I click on the one on Facebook and I see her friends, and I'm like, God damn it, they're all old. They're all old men. Like they look like me.
Man.
Yeah, no,
You're
but
like,
like
damn,
it's
I fall
exactly
into
what
that
I thought.
category
It's
now.
just, white dudes in their 60s, 70s who are like they're gonna fall for it. But I'm just having fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's got to be really interesting with the knowledge that you have to be able to go, I see all the red flags here. And, I don't know. Like I said, I feel like there's probably so much of that going on.
Hmm.
I was watching that Manosphere documentary. And those guys, that sounds very similar to that Mark guy you were talking about, of like, people are just giving them their
Yeah.
money, and for what? Like, for nothing. They're like, "Oh, my subscription, my
Right.
live like
Right.
me while I take your money and
I
live
mean,
like
if
this.
right. If you're gonna multi-level
Let me
market it,
teach
then
you how to
sure. Like
do it."
eventually you'll be here, but until then, thanks for the money. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy that did you see that documentary? Yeah, and the guy that was doing it, he like
Yeah.
invested with the one guy and then ended up with no money
I almost had to turn that one off. I just
just to see.
got
But
bothered.
yeah, well, for multiple reasons besides, but the money thing, I'm sitting here looking at this like, these guys are just, I just can't believe the amount of money that people are just handing them
Right.
for
And and
nothing,
and
for being
and
assholes
those
on the
men who are
internet.
asking for the money, and Mark, they have a superpower. So You couldn't do that. Like even if you're making a lot of money, you couldn't do that because you're like, my conscience. I can't respect myself, and
Yeah.
that doesn't register with them. That didn't register with Mark. I can take your money and I can justify it to myself by whatever means. I don't feel bad for it. I'm unstoppable if that's me. I'm unstoppable. If I don't have any heart at all, you can't stop me
Yeah.
because there's no governor that everyone else in the world has that says maybe you shouldn't do this, maybe this is where you draw the line. No, it's not there.
Man, I really should have gone into
Yeah.
psychology. I think
Are you
people are
getting
so
along?
fascinating. Like to look into their like childhoods and how they got to that. Like, oh my gosh, so interesting. But
Yeah.
I do want to go on to your national security stuff too a little bit here. So
Yeah, so
tell me that was the next
15
step, I
years
guess.
working criminal cases. My boss, who was an alcoholic and crashed his bureau vehicle at 7 p.m. one night because he was drunk, calls me in his office and says, "Hey, you're moving to the counterterrorism squad." And I go, "Okay, I guess this isn't a conversation." So there I went, and it was
Yeah.
the best group of people. Counterterrorism, both international
Mm.
terrorism and domestic terrorism, had changed quite a bit, and I got on at a good time where cases were, I think, getting worked better, more knowledge. It wasn't too
Yeah.
long that we were doing a lot of domestic terrorism work, which is infiltrating white supremacists, seeing who is, they're all talking about violence, but seeing who is more likely to maybe carry something out. But the very first case that I had working counterterrorism was kind of, I think they were easing me into national security from doing criminal for so long. My buddy Sean had a case on three men who had been maxing out credit cards and then sending money to Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a Yemeni American U.S. citizen who was at that time the spokesperson for Al Qaeda. He was clean English speaker, and so they used him to reach out to Americans in the English speaking world. These men were funding a domestic designated terrorist, so that's a charge. Sean did a great job, indicts all of them, and they're
Yeah.
sitting in jail. But one of them, Yahya Farouk Muhammad, thought, if I can get out of jail, I can actually go kill people now that everything's kind of exposed. If I get a different judge, maybe he'll be more lenient than my current judge. And so he asks another inmate, do you know any hitmen? And so my first case, working counterterrorism, was a murder for hire. And so working with Sean and the rest of the
Oh my
team,
gosh.
now we were taking this inmate who was claiming, yeah, this guy says he wants to kill his judge, and we wired him up, and that whole process is really difficult of sending somebody into a jail with a recording device, getting the all the checks to say that this is allowable because he was going to be recording on a defendant who is represented. So you got a Sixth Amendment right coming in there. So all these things were very difficult, and we
Mm.
send the informant back in, and he's got to say to Yahya Farouk Muhammad, "Hey, remember all that stuff about wanting to kill your judge? Can you say that again?" And and he did. And so now we had a case to move forward on
Oh
to try to
wow.
get this guy charged. And we had the informant who I think in all likelihood probably did know guys who would kill for money. So here's this Indian Muslim who's very devout,
Mm.
and he's befriending a redneck from central Ohio, probably because he thought this guy would know a hitman. And so the
Wow.
now informant is going in and he says, "Yeah, I do know a guy. You're going to call him at this number." And we had an undercover with a phone. And the code phrase to use if you want to hire him to kill someone is, "I'd like to buy a puppy," which was great by the informant because a devout Muslim is very, very unlikely to own a dog. And so it would be unique for him to
Oh.
say, "I want to buy a puppy." So he gets on the phone, calls the undercover, says, "I want to buy a puppy." They go through back and forth. The informant, whatever time later gets a call. He says, "It's done." And he goes to meet with the subject's wife in Chicago. Again, another thing that a devout Muslim woman wouldn't do, meeting alone with another man. And yet on the street they meet and he shows a picture, let me get it here, of what is purported to be a dead judge. So that is the picture that he showed, which we had our folks mock it up.
Okay.
That was his judge's head superimposed on my buddy's body. And I remind him all the time, "Hey,
Oh
remember
my
when we
gosh.
needed someone to be a body double for a 70-year-old frail Lebanese man? and we chose you. Yeah, so shows a picture of the purported dead judge, and we tried to get charges on the wife too, and she was wily. She got an attorney when she realized, I think I just paid a man to kill a judge. And so she got
Ooh.
an attorney, and the attorney reported it to the FBI. It was a big process, but in the end, Yahya Farouk Muhammad got 26 and a half years in prison for terrorist support and murder for hire.
Wow.
And that case won the Attorney General's award.
Hey, you're crushing it.
Crushing it. Well, I can't crush it anymore. I'm out.
Well, yeah. That's super fascinating. I mean, I feel like you learned so much about people doing this.
Yeah, it was interesting. So, I mean, this guy was, dude, I think he was mid 30s. He looked 15 years older than me, and he was just a tiny guy. And all the interactions he had with the informant, he was like, hey, if we get out, we're going to blow up bridges. Here, I'm going to sketch a terrorist training center I want you to build for me in the United States. We're going to go to the Mall of America, and I'm going to kill as many people as possible. He just, now the lid's off. He started with, well, I'm just going to support Al Qaeda. And I think now that he had charges looming, he's like, let's do it. Let's go all in. And yet he was just a meek little guy. He's nobody you'd ever think of that way. Later on, because he had tried to get his judge killed, and through communications, he was locked down. Only communication was with his attorney. And then he petitioned the judge to meet with his wife. So Sean and I drove up to see him and to be chaperones for the world's least romantic date. As a husband and wife sat like 12 feet apart on other ends of a table, and we set up a camera to videotape in case he's passing messages. And, just sit there while they're talking. And he was just absolutely harmless and yet wanted to kill. But at the end, as Sean was taking the wife back, Yahya Farouk Muhammad, a legitimate terrorist, said to me, you have a magnificent beard.
They do appreciate beards.
They do. He said, have you ever seen a lion without its mane? It's not natural. Because a Muslim man says you should have at least a fistful of a beard, and I had a even longer beard at that time.
Yeah, my husband and I went to India many, many years ago, and we had a driver there who was he was Hindu, but he liked the Maharaja mustaches. And my husband at the time had a full beard, and the driver just kept being like, "You look like a Muslim. You need to shave that." And he was like, "Okay." So then he went. This is a whole other story, but he went and had it shaved at a little local barber and fully shaved off. And we came back and the guy was mad he didn't leave the mustache, but it was really funny. Like, they definitely appreciate the beards are a staple there for sure. But yeah, that's fascinating. Do you think that guy would have actually gone and done all that stuff? Or do you, how much of that was talk? I mean, he was hiring the hitman, obviously, but like, he didn't have to actually carry out this action. So maybe he would have hired other people to do it.
Oh yeah, I believe he would have. I mean, this is like a phone tap. He's talking to a person that he thinks is safe. And so he's telling him, like, again, the guy was like 5'5" and 100 pounds. So he's not trying to mean mug and be a tough guy. I think he was telling, this is what I want to do now that the lid's popped off. The crazy thing about all this is that the informant was working with us because he wanted to get he had state charges. He wanted to get his time wiped away. So he was in prison for production of child pornography, which, not to minimize, but it was one of those penthouse type stories. He convinced a 17-year-old girl that he was a movie producer and he could get her in the movies. But first they had to have sex, and then he videotaped it, which is production of child pornography because she's not an adult. And I asked our federal prosecutor, if I brought you that case, would you charge it? He goes, absolutely not. And so, because it just was like, again, back to, it's not worth it. Like, she's 17, age of consent. Yeah, he videotaped. He was looking at 40 years in state prison, not for the charge, but because he was an asshole. And every time he appeared before the judge, he got hammered. And so, like, this guy who probably, if it was a federal charge, would have gotten a probation or a year, was looking at 40 years. Ultimately, we said, yeah, talk to the prosecutor, they're going to knock 5 years off. And he goes, forget it. And he just walked away. So we got it for free. a true patriot.
Wow. So, how working all of this stuff, I mean, you said this was all easier to get through than some of your church stuff. So, how did you get through and process all of it and not completely lose faith in humanity?
Yeah. So I think it's twofold. One is that agents tell stories, and on reflection, I believe it's how we process things. So we
Okay.
tell these crazy stories, but they're really survivor stories. You're like, hey, remember that time we almost got killed? You're like, yeah, and here we are. And
Mhm.
so, nobody's crying, but we're speaking out loud things that are inside otherwise, and we're confronting it that we went
Mhm.
through that. And again,
Yeah.
it's usually like laughing and hooting, but it's bringing these things out that actually I saw a meme where somebody's talking about being in the military, and it says, those times when I tell those dark jokes in the military, and a civilian says, I'm sorry that hurt you so much. You're like, we're laughing, but someone else might look at it and go, that's traumatic. But we're trying to deal with it. And
Yeah.
secondly, I had to just be self-reflective. Like, you can't just live your life and not think of, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Not having some mindfulness of, is this affecting me? Because in Chicago, it was 5 years. All I'm looking at are Mexicans who are involved in drug dealing, and all Mexicans are bad because everyone I
Mm.
see is bad. And I had to have a chat with a buddy, like, yeah, this isn't right, right? Like,
Mm.
help affirm to me that we know there's others who aren't like this.
Yeah. So talking to each other is super helpful.
Yeah, and it's people who understand.
Yeah.
They were right there too. So, okay, yeah, they get it and they can relate.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can only go off of your personal lived experience, and when that was all of your experience was dealing with bad people most of your career, like that would be tough. So,
Yeah, but it's also like saying, man, there sure are a lot of birds out here when you're bird watching. Like, you clock
yeah.
in the morning looking for criminals, and you're like, man, there's so many criminals. Like, yeah, that's what you're trying to find. And so when you find them, I guess don't be surprised.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you're retired now and you wrote a book or
Yeah,
are writing a book?
I wrote a book. It's with the FBI right now because they
Okay.
have to review it to see
Yeah.
that I'm not embarrassing them, which I'm not. I embarrass me more than anyone.
So, do we have a release date for that?
Yeah, it'll be released in early October. The
Okay.
title is Irreverend: From
Okay.
Saving Souls to Chasing Sinners in the FBI. And
Interesting.
so I tell some of these stories and we go into
Yeah.
depth on them.
Yeah. Well, that'll be super interesting. I'm gonna have to go put it on my Amazon list. I'm assuming I can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, well, I don't know what you don't get on Amazon.
Yeah. Well, where's a better place to get it? Do you have a website and stuff
Uh,
like that?
I do have a website. It
Okay.
is, hopefully you're ready for this. It's preachertobreacher.com.
Okay. Nice. Is that also your Instagram handle?
I should have gone with that. My Instagram handle. So again, I was using these bogus accounts after how many years Instagram's been around. My Instagram is _Eric_Robinson. I was surprised that was available. I
Yeah,
took it.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, this has been a very enlightening conversation. I've learned so much, Eric. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing some of those stories. I'm really excited for your book to come out. I'm sure anybody getting these little tidbits will also want to read more. Do you have any parting words for my listeners before we go?
Yeah, I would say this. I learned a lot in ministry. It was half the time that I spent in the FBI, and then the time I spent in the FBI was kind of broadening that concept of people. And on reflection, I look at many of the people I worked with in church were the same ones I was hunting down as criminals. The
Mm.
difference was this: the people in church would come to me and say, hey, Pastor, I've done this thing that's wrong, and I want to change. I want to be a better person. And so we call it repentance. They're turning around. And the
Mm.
criminals were the ones who were doing the same and going, I'm all in. Let's
Mm.
do this. And we had to force ourselves into their lives to turn them around. So there's a lot of similarity in humanity. It's how you're going to change.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really great. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
I've enjoyed it too, Tony. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.